For a fantasy epic where there are no other races except humans, DUNE amazes with its variety of strange, sometimes downright grotesque beings. At times, the mind simply refuses to accept all those face dancers, golas, witches, and Cymex. A special line in this list is occupied by the mighty Navigators of the Spacing Guild. These are beings without whom the Padishah Empire, as described by Frank Herbert, would have perished in the darkness of barbarism, disintegrating into isolated planetary systems. However, Herbert himself states in his books that without the Spacing Guild and its navigators, interplanetary travel would be impossible. Yet the author presents this as a given, without any explanation. One may endlessly criticize Brian Herbert and Kevin Anderson for losing the original tone of the DUNE Chronicles. But today we'd rather believe that it was Frank Herbert's groundwork that inspired his son's creativity. In the prequels written after his father's death, Brian Herbert places several previously unclear things into context. Therefore, our story today will contain a fair share of information about which the creator of the original epic chose to keep silent. And as usual, we shall begin from afar, with the times of the Butlerian Jihad. The war of humans against thinking machines is the main reason humanity in the DUNE Chronicles found itself in such a peculiar condition. Serena Butler's jihad forced the League of Nobles to mobilize all their forces against the enemy, and it cannot be said that the League's level of technological development was inferior to that of Omnius's synchronized empire. However, even before the full-scale war with robots and Cymex, many human leaders understood that the fragile balance between the League of Nobles and the synchronized empire was maintained only due to the slowness of space travel. Should either side advance even slightly, the other would be doomed. The scientist from Poritrin, Theo Holtzman, invented a protective field that allowed the League to shield its planets from the machines. However, the savant became entangled in political intrigues and traded scientific work for public life, all for the glory of himself. His mind ceased to produce bright ideas. Thus, when Aurelius Venport, an entrepreneur and pharmacist from the planet Rossack, offered Holtzman the assistance of Norma Cenva, the savant gladly agreed. Norma Cenva, the daughter of the supreme sorceress of Rossack, possessed a sharp intellect and incredible mathematical talent. Sadly to her mother, she was nothing more than a pitiful cripple, unfit for the grand purposes of the great Zufa. The poisoned atmosphere of Rossack played a cruel trick, placing an extraordinarily powerful mind within the frail body of a dwarf. The mighty mother failed to see her daughter's potential, but her father, and future husband, Aurelius Venport, did see it, as did Theo Holtzman. Eager to maintain his social standing, Holtzman gladly accepted Norma, who showed great promise. She did not disappoint, soon discovering several new applications for his field theory. Above all, Norma had no personal ambitions, being content with what she had. Thus, for a long time, Theo Holtzman and Lord Blood, ruler of Poritrin, managed to parasitize Norma Cenva's genius. But all good things eventually end. Holtzman once admitted to Norma that he did not truly understand how his fields worked. It was likely for this reason that he failed to notice the moment when the fields found their most important application. Based on Holtzman's field, modest Norma Cenva developed engines for starships capable of instantly transporting them to any point in the universe. When the greedy lord and the arrogant savant finally realized that Norma was working on something extraordinary, it was already too late. Of course, they tried to seize from Norma and the Venki company the results of her research. However, as fate would have it, a slave rebellion broke out, and both perished in the flames of the uprising. Norma herself was merely exiled from Poritrin, which likely saved her life. And as strange as it sounds, This ensured that the League of Nobles would ultimately triumph over Omnius after many exhausting years of the Jihad. On her way from Poritrin to Rossack, Norma's ship was attacked by the Titan Xerxes, eager to prove himself to the remaining Titans. Without hesitation, Xerxes decided to indulge in the suffering of the deformed woman and subjected her to cruel torture. Who could have known that the unbearable pain would unleash the dormant mental power of the Rossack sorceresses hidden within Norma Cenva's mind? The foolish and arrogant Xerxes did not expect such an effect, and paid for it with his life. Norma, unlike the hundreds of sorceresses trained by her mother, not only destroyed Xerxes and his accompanying Neo-Cymex with a powerful telepathic strike, but also survived. She managed to reach the sparsely populated, harsh world of Kolhar, where, with the support of her husband Aurelius Venport and her mother Zufa Cenva, she continued her work on the Holtzman engines. That the rebellious slaves of Poritrin had already conducted a successful test of her technology. Norma Cenva probably never learned. All traces of it were erased from the face of Arrakis by the almighty Shai Hulud. But Norma still possessed the most reliable source of knowledge, her astonishingly powerful mind. Originally, Aurelius Venport and the Venki Corporation intended to use Norma's discovery purely for commercial gain, but the Jihad Council and Serena Butler herself intervened. The entire fleet, built with the new engines, had to be handed over for military purposes. However, Venport was not too upset. He managed to secure excellent conditions for his company. In the long term, they would lose nothing. Quite the opposite. When the Jihad Council took possession of the fleet built on Kolhar by Norma and Aurelius, they initially ignored Norma's warnings. The fact was that the technology of instantaneous movement through the folds of space had a serious flaw. It was impossible to plot an exact course and avoid potential obstacles. Because of navigation problems, about 10% of ships folding space were lost. Yet Vori and Atreides, the first to dare use the ships in battle, did not care about the losses in his pursuit of a great goal. While the army of the Jihad, suffering enormous losses due to the imperfection of the space-folding technology, continued its struggle against Omnius, Norma Cenva stubbornly kept searching for a solution to the problem. At first, it seemed to her that installing extremely powerful computers would allow ships to chart their courses flawlessly. However, even the most advanced versions of these machines could not handle the task 100%. What was needed here was foresight, something that thinking machines were utterly incapable of. It was probably for this reason that, when the militant followers of Reyna Butler demanded that computers be removed from all ships and forbidden from further use, Norma Cenva did not give up. By that time, she had become firmly addicted to the spice from Arrakis, the main source of income for the Venki company. Having unlimited access to melange, as well as possessing telepathic abilities and the ancestral memory of many generations of the Rossack sorceresses, Norma approached the problem from another angle. Gradually increasing the dose of spice she consumed, Norma Cenva achieved a state of enlightenment. She began to see the future, at first only vaguely, but this foresight allowed her to save her native Rossack from yet another cunning attack by Omnius, who was trapped on Corrin. Having lost her beloved husband, Norma gradually stopped paying attention to the changes that enormous quantities of melange were causing in her appearance. She focused entirely on achieving a level of prescience sufficient to pilot space-folding ships. In the end, she essentially sacrificed her human essence. After conducting many different experiments with the spice, Norma came to the conclusion that for her purpose, inhaling the gaseous form of melange was the most effective method. This way of using the spice from Arrakis produced the clearest visions of the future, promising the highest precision in plotting courses. Without the slightest hesitation, Norma Cenva created a hermetically sealed chamber for herself. Using simple machinery, a constant flow of melange gas was pumped into it. The brilliant scientist entered this chamber and forever left the world of ordinary humans, becoming the first navigator. Norma Cenva was not at all concerned that her body was gradually transforming into something resembling a grotesque fish. She floated in weightlessness, enveloped in the orange gas of the spice, and immersed in her visions. Gradually, she lost not only her human appearance, but also the ability to communicate normally. She now interacted with the outside world through a special device that translated her distorted speech into standard Galak. Now, the goal of the Venki company was to recruit volunteers who would willingly follow in the footsteps of Norma Cenva. The slowness of long-lived beings is an eternal theme in the DUNE universe. When her beloved firstborn, Adrian, failed to survive the attempt to become a navigator, Norma Cenva withdrew from communication with the outside world for a long time. Now, she cared only about the matters of prescience, space folding, and the larvae of future navigators submerged in tanks filled with melange gas. To the great misfortune of the head of the Venhold company, Norma's great-grandson Joseph Venport, Emperor Jules Carino treacherously stripped the corporation of the privileges once secured by the Aurelius Venport from the Viceroy of the League of Nobles, Fëiqen Butler. And this despite the fact that, in the time of Emperor Jules, people still remembered whose help had allowed Fëiqen Butler to become Emperor Fëiqen Carino. As a result, several transport companies appeared across the Imperium, shamelessly using space-folding technology. The only thing that distinguished Venhold from them were Norma's navigators. The secret of creating navigators was carefully guarded on inhospitable Kolhar, and their anonymity was strictly maintained aboard all Venhold ships. Competitors, on the other hand, had to pilot blindly, steadily losing those very 10% of ships and cargoes. The human mind is sacred. Under this slogan, crowds of fanatics rampaged through the Imperium, rejecting all forms of technology, led by Manfred Torondo, a student and follower of the infamous Reina Butler. These people were quite capable of paralyzing the entire empire. This movement caused considerable problems for Emperor Salvador Carino, for the fanatics recognized no authority other than the words of their leader, Manfred. Yet, in theory, the insane Butlerians should have favored Venhold, since navigators control their ships through human mental power, not machines. Nevertheless, the fanatics became directly or indirectly the cause of the downfall of the Suk Medical School, the Order of the Rossack Sisters, and the Mentat School of Gilbertus Albans on Lampedas. The problem of these respected institutions, which sought to expand human potential and fix it genetically, lay in their secret use of forbidden computers to store accumulated data. The barbaric attacks on scientists and industrial facilities completely turned Joseph Venport against Manfred Torondo. His most reckless step was attempting to wage war on two fronts, against both the Emperor and the Butlerians. By that time, Norma Cenva had long since mastered the art of folding space by the power of thought alone, without Holtzman engines and without a spaceship at all. She could not only move instantly across space herself, but also take a few companions along. Such abilities were beyond her disciples, the ordinary navigators. This gift most likely came to Norma from a combination of prescience and the mental powers of her Rossack ancestors, who had mastered telepathy and telekinesis. Incidentally, it was actually Norma Cenva, not Raquela Berto Anirul, who became the first Reverend Mother in the known universe. Though the authors apparently did not notice it themselves. But since our interest lies with the navigators, let us leave the sorceresses aside and continue. The process of transforming humans into navigators proved extremely difficult and consisted of several stages of descending into melange addiction. Yet, even so, not every candidate could survive the final stage of transformation within a tank filled with the gas of the spice. Therefore, mass-producing navigators like on a conveyor belt was simply impossible. However, Joseph Venport did not abandon his ambition to build the largest fleet, and to achieve this, he decided to use an automated robot shipyard. By a strange coincidence, this base was accidentally discovered by Venhold's main competitor, Arjen Gates, owner of the Celestial Transport Company. But Joseph and his agent, who had become a mentat under the guidance of Gilbertus Albans, quickly calculated the location of this valuable site. Its armed seizure marked the beginning of open conflict, first with the Butlerian movement, and then with the Emperor himself. In the fire of that war, both the new base and the old one on Kolhar were destroyed. Twice, Norma Cenva used her navigator powers to save her foolish great-grandson, who longed for world domination. In the end, she had to make a deal with Emperor Roderick Carino, who took the throne after his brother's death. The Emperor guaranteed Norma the inviolability of the navigators. However, he did not guarantee an end to the war, and the struggle against Joseph Venport continued. It must be said that Venhold and its leader lost that battle, and once again Norma Cenva appeared on the stage, at the very last moment offering her great-grandson sanctuary, the chance to become a navigator. Emperor Roderick could not take his revenge on the enemy. One way or another, the war of Venhold against the fanatics and the Emperor led to the creation of the Spacing Guild. One could say that the dreams of several generations of Venports had come true, for the Guild obtained complete monopoly over interplanetary transportation. The Guild was now run not by merchants, but by navigators, hiding with their tanks from the eyes of ordinary people. These deformed seers proved to be more successful businessmen than any merchant in the universe, and the only thing that could restrain them was the cessation of spice deliveries. But that moment was still far away. The era of the Spacing Guild, which even altered the calendar system, had only just begun. A balance was established between the Imperial Carino family, the Landsraad Council, and the Spacing Guild, based on the distribution of spice. The Guild navigators commanded well-deserved respect. Even the Emperor himself was forced to listen to them, to say nothing of the heads of the great and minor houses. No communication between planets was possible without the participation of the navigators, and it mattered little that these former humans now resembled gigantic brains with fins. They possessed the gift of prescience, and all who held power rightly feared them. As for the fate of the first navigator, Norma Cenva, she completely lost her physical form and turned into pure intellect. In this state, Norma became something like a deity of the navigators, their most sacred secret. Perhaps she continued to guide her followers, but that remains mere speculation. A guild navigator is such a mysterious being that throughout the entire epic we encounter only three whose actions allowed their names to remain in history. About Norma Cenva, we have said enough. But who are the other two? Demur Pilru, the Ixian. Demur Pilru is a character from the book House Atreides by Frank Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. Since the creation of the Spacing Guild, more than 10,000 years have passed. The terrifying thinking machines are long forgotten, as are the fanatical Butlerians, and few still remember the vast Venport conglomerate. The capital of the Imperium has long since been moved from the nuclear-devastated Salusa Secundus to Kaitane. The production and distribution of the spice are now controlled by Chome, in which the Guild navigators, representatives of the great houses, and the Emperor himself participate on conditionally equal terms. The Pilru twins, sons of the Ixian ambassador on Kaitane, were unfortunate enough to live at the same time when Emperor Elrod initiated Project Amal, intended to create synthetic spice. Both twins tried to join the guild as navigators, but only Demur succeeded. He immersed himself in the melange mist and forever left his family behind. Meanwhile, Butlerian, supported by the Emperor, seized Ix and turned it into a base for experiments with synthetic spice. Demer's twin brother tried to enlist his sibling's help by sending him information about this incident, but the Navigator ignored his pleas. The troubles of humanity no longer concerned the newly ascended Navigator. Nevertheless, he still became entangled in the conflict over Ix, this time as an experimental subject. Count Casimir Fenring decided to test a prototype substance on a pair of unsuspecting navigators, one of whom happened to be Demer. Interestingly, he was transporting on his ship the army of the Atreides, sent to reclaim Ix for its rightful owners. Was the choice of test subjects truly accidental? Under the influence of the fake spice, the navigator Demer Pilru guided his ship into an uncharted region of the galaxy. It might have been nothing, except that without true melange, the navigator was doomed. Moreover, he somehow managed to sense the presence of humanity's ancient enemy, Omnius. Fortunately, real spice was found aboard the ship, and Demer managed to return his vessel to the Junction, the central base of the Spacing Guild. There, the navigator, poisoned by the imitation, finally died. Humanity received a warning that its ancient, implacable foe had survived. But did anyone truly listen? In the canonical part of DUNE, we meet only one navigator, Edric, a participant in the conspiracy to overthrow Emperor Paul Muad'Dib. Together with Gaius Helen Mohiam, the face dancer Scytale, the traitorous Fremen, and Princess Irulan, Edric, representing the Spacing Guild, took part in the attempt to assassinate Emperor Atreides. In this conspiracy, the Guild Navigator was needed to shield the conspirators' plans from the prescient gift of Paul Muad'Dib. Fortunately for the ruling dynasty, and unfortunately for its enemies, Edric fulfilled his role only partially. The gift of the Kwisatz Haderach proved stronger than the abilities of the Navigator. Although the Emperor was wounded in the assassination attempt and forced to abdicate, the fate of the conspirators was far worse. Naib Stilgar executed them by order of Regent Alia Atreides. Edric was removed from his tank and cast into the desert to die. However, Edric's story does not end there. It appears that the Tleilaxu somehow managed to preserve his genetic material and later produced his Gola. This suggests that Edric may have been one of the most powerful navigators of the Guild, or one of the most foolish, depending on one's point of view. In any case, this character appears near the end of the DUNE Chronicles, where a Jewish rabbi who mentions him refers to the Navigator as one of the Edrics. The Spacing Guild ruled the Imperium unchallenged for more than 10,000 years, but eventually the young Paul Atreides managed to bring it to heel. Yes, without navigators, space travel is impossible, but the navigators themselves cannot live without the spice, and Muad'Dib and his army of Fremen firmly seized control of the melange supply. The navigators were forced to retreat and accept the usurper's terms. They were also kept in check by the possessed Alia Atreides, and the God Emperor Leto II completely nullified the Guild's influence during the 3,500 years of his reign. This member of the Atreides family not only concentrated all the spice in his own hands and effectively destroyed the sandworms of Arrakis, he also encouraged the development of forbidden technologies on Ix, and the Tleilaxu experiments to create synthetic spice. As a result, after the death of the God Emperor, the influence of the Spacing Guild gradually waned. No gift of prescience could save the navigators from the honored Matres, who returned from the scattering to the remnants of the Imperium. The Matres conquered Junction and made it their main base. The surviving navigators were forced to submit to the new rulers, and the powerful women did not loosen their grip even after Marbella united the honored Matres and the Bene Gesserit into the new sisterhood. Nor was that the end of their troubles. The Spacing Guild itself was torn apart by internal strife. Members of its administrative branch decided to slaughter all navigators and replace them with Ixian computers. Is that all? Of course not. We will meet Norma Cenva, Edric, and an entire group of nameless navigators again in the distant future, near the end of time, known as the Kralizek. Having completely forgotten Demir Pilru's warning, humanity eventually discovered what those returning from the scattering had fled from. The name of this mysterious enemy was Omnius, and his new synchrony. Careless humanity once again faced the onslaught of thinking machines. In this war, Norma Cenva did not stand aside. She gathered the navigators and entered the battle against humanity's eternal foe. And by the will of gods unknown to us, the role of Norma's oracle and her navigators was almost decisive in that victory. Norma Cenva departed from the known universe and vanished together with Omnius into an alternate dimension. Did the navigators survive after the Kralizek? When peace and reconciliation between humans and thinking machines were finally achieved? Or did they all perish, no longer needed? Only imagination can tell. And that's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon. Your engagement is the best reward for me. Thank you for your attention. See you soon. Bye.